Music theory is what the foundation is. It's what the standard is upon which musical improvisation takes place, and it's how it's mostly taught. Now, there is a part of music theory that's very helpful and is very necessary, but it becomes problematic for the student when he or she has to rely on it to improvise. The more you have to think, the less you're going to be able to listen. And that poses a very big problem, because the music theory is going to make you have to think about what you're doing at all times. And as you're doing that, you're going to be able to listen less and less. And having that disconnect between your instrument and what you're hearing come out of it is going to cause major problems. The most common relationship for improvisers is that of a chord and the assignment of a particular scale to be played over the chord. This is very problematic because a scale gives the student already way too many options. There's too much information, and it needs to be simplified in order for the person to be able to really listen to the actual sound of what's being played and how it relates to the harmony directly. To demonstrate, I'm going to use a particular song form, and that is the blues. It basically appears in every sort of facet of Western music that exists, so it's very practical for one. The other thing that it offers is a very simple harmonic structure in terms of the most basic harmonic structure that exists for the blues, and that's namely 3 chords. So if we are in the key of E, we have an E7 chord for the first 4 measures, then the next 2 measures it switches to an A7 chord, and then for the next 2 measures back to E7, and the final 4 measures, 1 chord apiece, or 1 measure apiece rather, that would be a B7 for 1 measure, an A7 for a measure, an E7 for a measure, and finally a B7 for 1 measure. For the most part, if we're talking in terms of tonality, notes create one of 2 effects. The first is one of consonance, where the note doesn't feel like it has to move any particular place. And the second is one of dissonance, or where there's kind of this unsettled feeling between hearing that note and how it's relating to the harmony at that point. Now, what I'm going to do is select just 2 notes, the first of which is going to be a dissonance, and the second note is going to be the resolution of that. The 2 notes that we're going to choose for each one of the 3 chords is the first note of the scale that it corresponds to. Basically, you could just consider the name of the chord is always going to be the 1. So in the case of E7, E is 1 of E. If it's an A7 chord, A is 1 of A. If it's B7, B is 1 of B. And we're going to play that. That's going to be the 1. That'll be the consonant note. That's going to be the release tone. The second note is going to be 1 whole step higher. Now, you could relate that to a scale, or you could just think of it in the simplest terms. It's just 1 whole step higher for each one of those 3 notes. So, for E7, we play an E7. The 2 notes you're going to deal with are F sharp, that's going to be the 2, or the whole step above, and then the 1 will be the resolution for that, which is E. So it's going to be a pairing of 2 to 1. For the A7, we're going to be dealing with the B, the 2, resolving to A, the 1. And finally, for the B7, we're going to have the 2 as C sharp, and that's going to resolve to the B, which is 1. So to recap, you've got F sharp to E for E7, B to A for the A7, and C sharp to B for the B7. There are 2 different ways that you can go and approach this when you're going to be trying this out for yourself. The first is, if you don't already know the basic 12-bar blues in E, obviously you should learn that. If you don't have a means of hearing the chords in real time, like on a pre-recorded track, whether it was made by someone else or yourself, then it's not absolutely integral to have to hear the chords, as long as you can hear them in your ear as you play them. Now, for a lot of people starting out, that becomes very, very difficult, and I understand that. So what you would have to do is find either a pre-recorded track, or you could get some sort of recording device to record yourself playing the chords to the E blues, and then use that to solo over. That way you can actually hear the chords while you're soloing, and not have to deal with trying to do both at the same time. There are a lot of different places to play the 2 to 1 on the guitar. Just the F sharp to E can be played in over half a dozen places already. Now, what I suggest is keep it very simple. Pick one spot on the guitar, one position ideally, where you can access each one of the 2-to-1s. And you don't have to move around, because the more you're going to have to move around, the more difficult you are making it for yourself, and the less you're going to be able to really focus on hearing and taking in what each one of these notes sounds like. What you're looking to do is try to be as creative using these 2 notes as you possibly can. Now that's a big challenge because you're dealing only with 2 notes, and that's not a lot of melodic information. But you have to be able to tell a story, and you have to be able to communicate that. And you have to also connect with the instrument that you play. Because if you can't get your instrument to speak and tell the story in the way that you want it to, then it doesn't matter if you have a million notes at your disposal. So in this regard, you want to start off very simply. As far as rhythmically speaking, articulation in terms of how you play the notes, the dynamics in terms of the volume that you use and fluctuation of the volume, that's totally up to you. Really, the only component here that is being restricted is the melodic information. Everything else is totally carte blanche. So you can use as much of that as you'd like and just experiment and have fun. There's no right or wrong here. The main thing, though, is when you do play it, you have to make sure that you're really feeling the actual groove, because that's the foundation upon which everything you play is going to be set. If you take that away and you take the timing and the feel, the thing that gives you presence, then none of it's going to actually stand and work or sound very good. I'm now going to demonstrate playing or improvising a couple choruses using just the 2-to-1 melodic restriction on each one of the 3 chords. Now, if you're a guitarist, I'm going to demonstrate that I'm only playing up in the first position, and I'm actually only going to use the top 3 strings. So the 2-to-1 for the E7 will be this F sharp on the 2nd fret of the high E, and going to the open string, the E. So there's your F sharp to E for the E7. For the A7, my 2-to-1 will either be the open B string or the fretted B. Again, I didn't have to shift, so I can play either of those. And that is going to resolve to the A, 2nd fret on the G string. And finally, for the B7, the C sharp to the B will either go from the 2nd fret on the B string, C sharp, and will resolve to either the open B string or the fretted B on the G string at the 4th fret. But once again, I'm staying completely in one position. I'm not making any shifts or stretches whatsoever. Because I haven't anyone here to accompany me and I don't have a pre-recorded backing track at my disposal, I'm going to accompany myself for this demonstration, improvising over the blues in E using just 2-to-1s. Let's give it a try. 1, 2, 3, 4. The solo you just heard me play only used those 2-to-1s that I had spoken of before. And for the guitarists out there, if you watch my left hand, I didn't move out of position once, and I played only those particular notes on the fretboard. The variations came from the articulation, the dynamics, and the rhythm. So I encourage you to try it out and see what you can come up with. Don't worry about making any sort of mistakes. Just try things out, and you'll start to find your own musical voice that way. You'll also start to get in your ear what exactly the two and the one sound like. So when you hear the chord played, you'll already know how to access that note directly rather than having to think of a scale.